This isn't just a McFarlane Batman figure, this is a misunderstood statement. Albeit a rather divisive one, because I feel like not everyone's going to be on board with a slight revamp of Year 2 Batman, because technically we have gotten him before in the form of a Target exclusive that in and of itself was also very divisive. And it looks like it's about to make a comeback with a Big Bad Toy Store exclusive that's now black instead of blue, yada yada, with all the cape accessories. And it looks like when it comes to Todd McFarlane's design of Batman Year 2, it's always the cape that has to make the broadest statement to make it clear that this is the Year 2 Batman. And now we have a collector's edition entry that is pretty much taking inspiration from Batman Year 2, only this time with a couple of unique caveats. Just a couple, because not everything about this figure is 100% unique. Because if you couldn't already tell from the get-go, yes, you'll notice right here that we are boasting once again an amalgamation of the Three Jokers Batman torso with the Hush body parts. So instinctively I recognize the legs, the arms, and we've kind of been down this road plenty of times before. So in terms of the actual body sculpt, it's going to be pretty tight. It's going to be pretty well tooled as far as the assembly, the proportions. You have a very yoked up Batman. And I actually really do like how so many different facets about this specific body that's been tooled together and being utilized almost as much as the Nightfall buck is kind of becoming, like I said, not only the staple, the hill that McFarlane's probably going to die on as far as the DC Multiverse Batman interpretations are concerned, but also it almost kind of makes me wish that this was the body that was utilized when they were tackling the Arkham Asylum series, even though they were trying to go for like specific proportions and the way the design of the suit is kind of tailored and sculpted onto the skin of the body. But when I kind of look a little back and we kind of approach this specific gray, I look at the body parts, I look at the, like I said, the sculpting of the shoulders, the abs, the torso, etc., and specifically those thighs. If you guys remember, the Arkham Asylum Batman had some thick-ass thighs, and so whenever I see this body, I can't think to myself what it would have been like to kind of have utilized something like this to make a custom, but ultimately very definitive Arkham Asylum Batman. With that said, however, you'll notice that this is the Year 2 interpretation, so he's going to have not only the gray, but also have the very circular, or rather oval, yellow symbol right underneath there on the chest, as well as the utility belt. And pretty standard as far as the way that that's all always been sculpted, and that even goes double for not only the diaper piece, the boots, but even the gauntlets. It's very trademark, textbook Hush Batman, to the point where I really wish that they would reinforce a little bit of the spikes on the gauntlets, because you can notice right here that one of mine is a little bit on the warp side. Beyond that, you'll also notice that he's got a very specific color scheme as far as the blue and black. You'll notice that it's predominantly black, but with blue shadings that are kind of reminiscent of the Nightfall 2-pack Bane. If anything, I almost want to kind of theorize, tinfoil hat style, that they might have used the same exact pattern. It almost seems like the way that the pattern is kind of sketched right there on the diaper, on the gauntlets, and then on the boots. It throws me back just a tiny little bit to the animated series, but most importantly, the first figure that came to mind was the Bane inside of that Nightfall 2-pack that was making the rounds last year. Very definitively for some folks, because that also came with that Batman that had a much more unique and much more accurate color scheming for that Nightfall sculpt. But beyond that, it's still ultimately the Nightfall buck, and as such, you'll also notice that along with the paints and the sculpting, the articulation is also pretty standard, but also very, very, very sticky, because this guy is frankly very, very, very coated in paint right out of the box. It's just got this massive waft of the acrylic paint or whatever style or substance of paint that they use to kind of coat and deco their figures all around in their factories. It just kind of reeks, to be quite honest. So there's a part of me, and obviously there's another secondary reason as to why it really reeks of that paint material, and we'll get to that momentarily. But you'll notice right here off the bat that, yeah, just moving certain joints about, you can very audibly hear the squeaking and the scratching of the paint up against the plastic. And I do think that it's a little bit cumbersome, because after a while, even after passing it with the hairdryer and such, not only do you run the risk of warping some of the plastic in tow, but also maybe loosening up a little bit of the paint, that it can kind of potentially create some scuffs as you move the paint about. So that's one thing that I will definitely agree with the masses on, is that sometimes I do wish that McFarlane would kind of dial back a little bit on the paint that's applied to whatever kind of shade of plastic is underneath. That's probably why some of the better figures that McFarlane has come up with as far as articulation and really good feeling body sculpts are generally because the plastic is actually that color, as opposed to having an extra first or second coat of paint covering it all up. So as demonstrated here, you'll notice that certain joints of the articulation are probably a little bit on the robust side. Now, thankfully, the head is not that kind of joint. It actually swivels all the way across right about right there. 360, can tilt very fluidly up and down, side to side. It's actually one of the more free-flowing head joints that I've ever had the pleasure of dealing with, at least this year so far. The arms, on the other hand, can fully rotate vertically 360 as other Hushbucks do, but they are a little cumbered by not just the paint, but also rather the circumventing cape, which I'll tackle momentarily because I got some really broad things, hey, no pun intended there, to talk about as far as the cape is concerned. But extension towards the sides can also be expected fully right about right there. Bicep swivels can still rotate 360, except again, because of the coated paint, it's a little difficult to do so on mine, as well as the two joints at the elbows that can fully bend all the way up, but they kind of stop a little bit short due to not only the paint, but also the sculpting of the bicep itself. Ball joints at the wrists and as well as the ankles. So in terms of rotating the hands, they can fully do so 360 and bend inwards and outwards, no problem. But the ankles are, of course, going to be a little bit troublesome due to the way that ball joint is a little on the antiquated side. Bending the foot up and down is no problem, but rotating, you kind of have to grab the foot and the joint together in unison to make sure that you get full rotation. And you can still tilt it side to side and kind of pivot it inwards and outwards ever so slightly like so. But of course, like I said, if you've dealt with the Hushbuck before, you pretty much know exactly what you're in store for. Same thing goes for the torso that can fully rotate in place 360, no problem, right about right there. Just a little bit of that squeakiness. Crunching inwards, however, is pretty much null and void because of how stonky that torso is made out to be from the hush body. But extension towards the sides is a little bit more on the favorable side, and kind of in the middle with some slight nudging is the crunching on the obliques. Same thing with the waist, except mine is really gripped together. So rotating it all the way across like so is just a little bit on the nerve-wracking side. And there's some slight nudging in any kind of direction on the waist diaper piece, but again, it's a little bit limited. So I do understand if this one might not be floating so many people's boats as far as the articulation. You'll notice right there that the legs can extend about the standard issue right about right there, almost at a full 90 degree. Some slight extension towards the back, but of course that creates a major gap right there between the top legs and the diaper. Extension on over to the side, it's a little bit on the cracky sounding bit, but at the same time you can see right there that it does a full 180 degrees. And then of course knee joints that can fully bend all the way up. Thankfully no cumbrance of any kind, nothing impeding it, but at the same time it is a little sticky, and to kind of place it back in place, you'll notice it's a bit robust and almost kind of scary that I'm a little nervous that any of the joints may crack. So make sure that you're kind of blasting it some extra time with some kind of blow dryer or extra hot water to make sure that that's loosened up. And then of course you're going to have toes that can fully bend almost all the way up right there for extra positioning. And trust me, you're going to need that, because as we've kind of dabbled in the channel so many times when it comes to the Hush body, it doesn't necessarily have the best proportions and the best balancing as far as making sure that it stands all on its own. However, you may notice that that's not 100% the case here. I'm actually kind of surprised by how well it's able to balance, and it's probably because of the most obvious trait that's kind of offsetting and bringing things to a much more concrete balance than any other of the Hush bucks before. And that's because of this goddamn massive ass cape that McFarlane decided to stylize after that specific cover during the year 2 arc. I can't remember exactly which part or which issue it was, but it's one of the variants where he's kind of lunging towards the camera with the hook, kind of feeding into a little bit of that manipulation of anatomy and camera eye perception that McFarlane often likes to do, like he was doing with Spider-Man, with throwing the webs at the camera, and there was this whole controversy. So he's kind of styling it in that preference with the hook, and when he does so, he styled the cape in a very crazy, dynamic, and super fluid style. And they decided to mimic that style with this cape right here, thus leading to a divide amongst collectors, because I've seen, I think, almost equal parts of people saying that they hate this cape and then others saying that they love it. And I gotta be honest, I'm kind of warming up to the loving section of that team, because there's a part of me that's like, Yeah, they could have easily gone with yet another Hush cape to kind of fit the mold as far as the way that's tied to the body, etc. But giving it the super dynamic cape, yeah, it looks very garish and unorthodox when he's in a very neutral position. But let's say that you were to pose him in a very, like I said, dynamic, in action, animated sort of style, sort of way, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have not only a very good re- replication of that comic book cover, but maybe even something just a bit more, like I said, stylized and eye-catching when displaying it in your shelf or on your in your detolf case, what have you, to make him stand out just a little bit crazier and a little bit cooler. And there you go. You can see right here, you're seeing an awful lot of that good influence that the cape is having on the overall body, to the point where it makes it stand out just a little bit more than your average Batman. And sure, for me, it's a little difficult to ignore the Piccolo style of kind of curvature here at the top part of the cape. But once you, like I said, kind of play and futz with the arms to then feed into the style of the cape, to me, it looks pretty badass. I do like how it's got the blue on the inside, the black on the outside, and like I said, it kind of complements the cowl, which in my opinion, I actually really do like the head sculpt. I like the elongated ears, the overall style and sculpting of the cowl, the eyes, the little bit of blue on both the ears and the little bit of the brow and the front of the nose right there is pretty nice. I even like the grimace. Would have maybe preferred a slightly much more neutral expression on his face, even though that is exactly the style that he had in that specific comic cover that they're replicating. But at the same time, I know that there's other variants and other issues of the Year 2 arc that have him boasting a much more neutral expression to kind of favor other poses that he has while also donning this similar style version of the suit. So there's a part of me that kind of wishes it would have came with either an additional head accessory with or an additional mouth plate to be able to swap it for this one. And that kind of leads a little bit into probably my biggest complaint with this figure that I will attest to, is that this is technically under the collector's edition branding, and yet there's not a whole lot to kind of specify it to be a collector's edition, and kind of fits better being a regular release. If anything, that's probably my hot take of this review, is that this probably should have been a standard release, not a collector's edition, because you got Batman here, you got this giant cape, which is probably the argument that some folks will probably use, is that to allocate the amount of, manufacturing and rubberized plastic that we utilize for the cape itself, which in and of itself is also not the best well constructed. I like the color scheming, but I don't appreciate how you can visibly see some seams on the inside part of the cape right here, where you can see that the extra piece was then glued on to the rest of what is your traditional Batman cape. So that's the only area that a little bit of those blemishes do start to become apparent. But you pull back from that, and he really doesn't come with a whole lot of accessories that you're generally accustomed to when it comes to much more contemporary collector's editions, especially when it comes to the others that are included in this wave, because in this wave, we also had Adam Strange and Deadshot, and both of those guys came with added forearm accessories for Deadshot, because of course they can't throw in guns, but they can at least throw in some smoke effects, extra hands. You got a really good, well-tooled body. But then when it comes to Adam Strange, a character that I didn't even know about prior to McFarlane making him into a collector's edition figure, he comes with added head plates or face plates. It felt like an actual well-valued pack for a collector's edition. Batman here comes with a scythe that he utilizes in that cover, which is decently sculpted, even though it's a little bit on the wobbly side when it comes to the actual hook here at the front. But I do appreciate the chrome finish as well as the spikes here on the handle, so it's fairly accurate to what you see on the cover right there. The only downside, though, is that on the cover, he is holding it with his left hand, so the default left hand he comes with is that Hush one that's kind of curled, kind of extending in a very horrific sort of style. And I've tried fitting it on that hand, and a couple of times it does work, but it still looks kind of awkward. It doesn't look like he's gripping onto it tightly as well as he does on that cover, so that's a little bit of a fallacy that was found there. I kind of wish that they would have atoned that for a second pair of hand accessories that were both gripped, because instead we get an asymmetrical pair on the side, one of which is gripped, but that's only for the right hand. The left hand, however, only comes fisted with no grip right there in the middle, so therefore you're kind of shit out of luck if you really want to accurately portray him with the hook. And again, like I mentioned before, you can technically fit the hand on the left hand, but it's going to look very wonky. It's a little loose. You're going to have to futz a little bit with it to make sure that the hook is not falling out, like it's done so a handful of times with me. Therefore, the only alternative is the fisted hand and to have him hold the hook with the right hand, which is properly gripped right about right there. However, I feel like the majority of collectors are not going to be doing that. They're going to be utilizing this gripping hand for the gun, the pistol that, of course, he is holding right here in his chest holster, which is, it's a pretty moderate pistol, sculpted decently, painted overall with this matted gray finish. So I do wish that maybe they could have decoed out the handle to be like black or brown just to make it a little bit more natural looking, to say the least. But it does the job, and like I said before, it fits perfectly into his gripping hand. Even the trigger finger manages to kind of slide right in there pretty cozy like. So you can see right there that it fits the bill. And of course, this is the reason for why this figure is labeled with the 17 plus and gets by either being available on online retail only, or if you do manage to come across it in the collectors section of Walmart's electronics department, that's the only place where you're going to find it. You're not going to find it in the actual toy aisle. But there you go. And I got to be honest, like I said, I feel like that hook is going to fall at any given second right now due to how loose this hand truly is. I really do wish that they would have included a second gripping hand on the left as opposed to just the right to give us some symmetrical ones right there. Or like I said, a third pair of hand accessories, because ultimately what you see kind of before you hear, and that was my fault. That was definitely my fault. My bad. I nudged it a little bit right there. But at the same time, it wouldn't have been so easy if we had gotten that second or third pair, rather, of hand accessories that came with a gripped left hand, maybe a different expression for the right one, etc. Because that collector's edition value, it runs $30 a pop, maybe even more so if you were to happen to come across it aftermarket or if you're going for that platinum variant, because that's the whole point of that wave. So to see that Batman kind of got, especially with a character like Batman, this is Batman we're talking about, it stings a little bit to see him get a little undercut. Whereas Adam Strange, I'm glad that McFarlane takes a very obscure character and gives him the collector's edition treatment. Any other company would not have done that, so it's good to see that he takes his chances with those obscure characters. But, like I said, an extra mouthplate for a different expression or a second pair of hands probably would have sweetened the deal, especially when you're already kind of annoying some collectors by technically giving them a slightly, and to put it mildly, slightly inaccurate color scheme. Because frankly, out of everything here, I feel like the gun and maybe the gray parts of his bodysuit are probably the only color accurate parts of the overall ensemble from the comics. If you really do want a comic accurate year 2 Batman, you're going to have to hunt down the platinum variant, which thankfully I did manage to find at the very, very, very last second. We're talking literally just a day or two before sitting down to recording this review. And out of all places, the Best Buy that I used to work at. I walked in there just for shits and giggles, and lo and behold, the platinum edition of the year 2 Batman, which is decked out with the correct color scheme, therefore inverting the black and blue on any parts of the original and kind of now making the blue the predominant color on the cape, as well as the gauntlets, boots, diaper, and cowl. And then everything that was highlighted in blue on the original is now highlighted in black. And technically is, like I said, the much more correct color scheme for those McFarlane covers that he sketched out, as well as the holster being blue instead of brown. So I know that it kind of boils down to an awful lot of people's preference, but even I have to admit that it's just a little bit on the shady side to have the Platinum Edition, the much more scarce one, because trust me, it's very scarce, very high in demand. Therefore, it almost kind of stings me to open it, and as you can see, I still have it encased in the box, and it almost makes me wonder if I should even crack it open, or maybe, due to how scarce and valuable it kind of is even right now, keep it in box. I'll let you guys, tell me in the comment section. Do you guys think I should crack it open or leave it in the box to see how much it racks up for it within the years to come? But apart from having the much more color accurate bat suit on there, you also got a much more reflective bluish tint to the hook. Apart from that, though, I can't really tell any other discernible differences, but trust me, that sole difference of inverting the blue and black on the body of this original to what was in the original comic book art to be accurate it makes a huge statement. And I feel like that statement gets even broader and bolder when you take the cape into consideration, that I think is a little misunderstood. A lot of people were looking at the cape and going, wow, that thing looks ugly, that thing looks atrocious. But frankly, I might just be in the minority, because after futzing with the body, which again, even I'm getting a little sick of seeing the same Hush limbs and the Three Jokers torso, etc., at least it's kind of favoring a very bold design as far as, like I said, the cape, the aesthetic of the year 2 suit. And even though it's a little on the inaccurate side when it comes to being predominantly black for the main release and only finding the accurate color scheme on the platinum variant, it's all about giving the unit, the release, a reason to exist. And even though I still would have preferred some added accessories for it to kind of be worthy of the collector's edition labeling, I still really do appreciate the boldness of the cape, the utilization of the cowl, and to me, it's one of the more standouted releases of the year as far as Batman releases are concerned. And trust me, that's still saying a lot considering how much Batman we truly get time and time again. So just when you think you're getting sick of a Batman, it kind of surprises you in the most unlikeliest of ways. And to me, it truly was that cape. It was the way that it's kind of styled and coiling all over the place in a way where, yeah, part of me kind of wishes that maybe they could have sweetened the package by giving him a cloth cape with some additional hooks and an overly tailored design. But at the same time, I feel like that's kind of been done with the Target exclusive, and it's going to be done again with the Big Bad Toy Store black variant. But on the bright side here, like I said, it's almost kind of leaning towards being a cover replication. And when we're on the subject of cover replications, I feel like this is the way to do it, as opposed to simply just taking a very old body like the 2021 Dark Knight Returns sculpt and just making it black and white just so that it can kind of be mimicking the classic Frank Miller cover and calling it a day. I to me feel like that's a little bit on the lazy side, and seeing entries like this, seeing efforts like this, I feel is just a little bit more worth it, thus resulting in the Batman Year 2 Collector's Edition getting a very high but still even-tempered 7 out of 10. I'm not fully sold of how far it's gonna get into the rankings in regards to my top 5 list at the end of the year for McFarlane Batman figures, but I can definitely say makes the grade for being one of the more unique ones that at least took a chance with, like I said, something that could have easily and probably, well, in fact did divide the fans, but at least it favored in my perception of something that at least looks a bit different than your traditional Hush body, your traditional Three Jokers body. And that was enough for me to give it that rating and to at least make the hunt for it worthwhile, whether it be for the original release that got shipped into me or the platinum variant after all this time. And seeing my patience get rewarded in that manner was pretty gratifying. But I really want to check in on your guys' hunt so far, if you guys have managed to acquire the Year 2 Batman or the Platinum variant. And while you guys are down there, let me know which cover do you guys want to see get replicated in this McFarlane Collector's Edition style, whether it be that cover recreations line that they started doing with the the Killing Joke Joker that recently got stolen out of a truck for some goddamn reason, or the Dark Knight Returns version. Or do you want something that's more so on this side where, yeah, the articulation and the body sculpting kind of takes a little bit of a hit, but at least they add something to it that makes it stand out in a much more unique way. Whatever you guys have to say, let me know down below, as I mentioned. And while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button if you guys enjoyed this review, thumbs down if you did not. And as always, take care and stay humble.